Today, John Kerry is in Cuba to symbolically raise the U.S. flag over the U.S. embassy there for the first time in well over 50 years. Let's watch. Presidential.
All right, so here he is, and we've got. I was about to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
You know what?
You know goddamn
we weren't talking because it's actually
national
we
anthem.
weren't talking because it's actually a little moving.
Yeah,
It was actually moving.
No, I don't agree. Goddamn lip. Okay.
I think it's moving. I'm with Ben on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we should talk.
Okay.
Kerry
so
definitely has a certain dignity to him.
yeah. So now people are getting all over John Kerry for making this deal with Cuba. Of course, Obama made the deal, but John Kerry went down there and raised the flag. But to Ben and Richard's point, we just raised the American flag in Castro's Cuba. What now?
No, but that's
right?
deceptive editing. Marco Rubio is going to tell us soon that was actually the white flag of surrender. Someone put in the American flag in post. And I'm hardly joking there.
So they think that this is an un-American move to raise the American flag.
Yeah,
Right.
they're downing on the flag.
Yeah. Now, John, were the Republicans upset at this move?
Some of them were actually.
Really?
Some of them actually sort of cynically took advantage of this to make some extremely poor points. So you're going to see Marco Rubio. We've got a couple of videos of him. And I think we occasionally point out cases of Republican projection. There's going to be some of the highest quality Swedes, the greatest projection in the world, as Trump would say, coming up in these clips. So here is Marco Rubio on the opening of the American Embassy.
These deals demonstrate with jarring clarity how this administration has failed to anticipate impending crisis, ignored the realities of the globalized economy, and sought to make America liked rather than respected. The way it has placed politics before policy, and adversaries before allies, and political legacy before leadership. The way it has confused weakness for restraint, concessions for compromise, and most simply of all, wrong for right.
We got it.
That is literally from 1984. Every single thing he said there was exactly the opposite of the truth.
And he didn't, well, I mean, it was just these little platitudes. It was just these clever turns of phrases that guys like RJ write, right? I mean, it wasn't, but there wasn't, not you.
You
RJ,
got to turn
Robert Wagner.
adversity into advantage sometime, you know, I mean, and then you throw it into a speech.
But there's nothing in there about what the actual dangers are or what we should do with Cuba. Nothing. It was just like, it was literally a soundbite and nothing more.
Well, this is exactly like the Iran deal, and we may have a clip about the Iran deal too, when he was alluding to the Iran deal partially, as well as Cuba. The idea that somehow to negotiate and come to an agreement with someone that's not your ally is selling out, but they never explore the alternative, which in Iran's case is war, and with Cuba is what? Ongoing.
More of the same nonsense.
Nah, be fair to the Republicans, man. We only gave the embargo 54 years.
Yeah.
I think 55 would have done it. Okay.
Probably.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
So, look, these guys are vomitous, and it's now gotten painful to listen to the Republicans. I can't stand the sound of their voice with all this, the 1984's Orwellian talking points about how compromise is always concession. We should never compromise on anything. If you conducted your personal life that way, you would be a frickin' mess, right? I don't compromise on the road. I don't compromise with my wife. I don't compromise with my coworkers. Right? You'd be a pariah. You'd be, and probably locked up at some point. Yeah. And that's how these guys want to conduct business. So I almost don't want to address the nonsense of their policy. I just want to say something about Marco Rubio. He's a boy, okay? That's what he is. And he has no chance of winning, no chance. So does he have a chance of becoming the vice presidential candidate? Yes, he does, okay? The presidency, blah, 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 blah. All the people pundits, like how I dismissed Jindal from the beginning, like, yeah, Jindal, who is governor? Get out of here, right? Get out of here. And so obviously that's true. He's polling at -3%, but that's easy. That's easy to predict, right? I'm telling you, Marco Rubio, okay, get out of the race, man. Clean up, go home. the mainstream pundits like him for whatever reason.
Yeah.
He fits their mold.
He looks
attractive.
reasonable.
He
so they
looks
can-
reasonable,
right.
and he'll cut all the billionaires' taxes. That's why they
And he
like
doesn't-
Marco Rubio.
And he
right?
doesn't seem angry.
That's right.
That's true.
He
He doesn't
seems
seem angry.
pleasant. They love him on the cocktail
Sometimes
circuit.
thirsty, but
He's-
not angry.
Look,
Yeah.
Marco Rubio is that kid in the 3rd grade who is always squeaky clean and always had the stuff in his hair to keep it neat and was always sucking up to the teacher. He was that kid that everybody else in class hated.
Yeah, and guys like Ted Cruz are going to punch him in the nose and take his lunch money.
Yeah.
Okay, he has 0% chance of winning the nomination overall, and he's a boy, and he should clean up and go home.
Okay, so really fast, I want to read, I don't want to subject Cenk to any more of Marco Rubio for right now, but I want to read this because I love this. We don't have a graphic, I apologize. He's talking about concessions to Iran and Cuba here. He says, I believe they represent the convergence of nearly every flawed strategic, moral, and economic notion that has driven the president's foreign policy, which is not true of either of those things, but it does perfectly describe any desire to continue the embargo against Cuba. Flawed strategic, moral, and economic notions that have not accomplished what they were intended to accomplish and were inherently immoral in their effect on the Cuban people. But he misses all of that, of course. Now, we do also have, it wasn't just Marco Rubio who was attacking what Kerry did today. Jeb Bush was also speaking out against it, saying, the visit by Secretary of State John Kerry to Havana is a birthday present for Fidel Castro, a symbol of the Obama administration's acquiescence to his ruthless legacy. Cuba remains an unyielding dictatorship, a tragic example of the folly of communism, and an affront to the conscience of the free nations of the Western Hemisphere. He also pledged to reverse Obama's strategy of accommodation and appeasement and commit to helping the Cuban people claim their freedom and determine their future free from tyranny.
Now,
By going back.
Now, to be
Yes.
fair to Jeb Bush here, when he called it a birthday present for Fidel Castro, let us remember that there was a cake and the present of a Bible. Oh, wait, that was Ronald Reagan with Iran, wasn't it? I'm sorry, never mind. I was on the wrong track altogether.
That's a great point by Richard. Okay, I'd like to ask Jeb Bush a question. Hey, your brother was in office for 8 years and your dad was in office for 4 years. Why didn't they do anything about Castro? Wait, I thought the Bush family was full of answers, right? You guys didn't do appeasement. You guys continued to do the same stupid-ass sanctions, right? You did the same stupid-ass embargo, and what was the result? Dick. Isn't that correct, Jeb Bush?
Yeah.
That's what I would ask him. What results did your family get? Then admit to me that your brother or your dad are losers who had the wrong strategy, who didn't get us any results from their embargo. Isn't that correct, Jeb Bush? Then why don't you shut the fuck up, right? But, oh, yeah, I'd be tough. I did the same thing my brother and my dad did, which got us no results at all. All right, then you have no new answers. Piss off.
Yeah.
You're, by definition, incorrect.
You know, besides making a great point, Cenk, you've just impressed me with how much you've learned rhetorically from Donald Trump.
That's right. That's right. No, I thought
That
about
was
that
fourth
too.
grade level. I just checked
No,
it
no,
actually.
and I called Marco Rubio a boy. And Jeb Bush is a dummy.
You haven't
and a
gotten us
loser.
dick.
I kind of like it. I think I'm going to keep doing it.
That's not bad.
Yeah. Dum-dum.
The final point that I want to make is I was reading.
He says dum-dum.
I know,
Who
it's
says
amazing.
dum-dum?
And
Which
he's
grown-ass
running for
man
the
says
highest
that?
office in the land.
But you know what? The other guy who said equally ridiculous things?
Who?
George W. Bush, who was president for 8 years. Hey, stretch.
He
Hey,
turned
long
blossom.
guy. Hey, short guy. Hey, pooty poot.
He's the money
That's
man.
true.
Unbelievably, they weren't as dumb. They
weren't
like,
as
like
dumb.
we've gone under Bush.
Bush was more presidential. I
By the
think.
way, when I think of Jeb Bush now and I see what's happening with his campaign, and there's a lot of time left, and Jeb Bush is one of the few guys running for president on the Republican side who could be the nominee still, despite
Right.
the ridiculous poll numbers.
Yeah.
But it's to some, and Al Gore is a totally different kind of guy, but there's a message for Al Gore there in the don't run. Like Jeb Bush could have quit as the Bush the smart one, the bright one who should have run and never did, who would have been a great president, who would have run, and instead he's going to, runs the risk of petering out at 13% and getting out when he loses Iowa to Ted Cruz.
Although
Yeah,
he
but
has
I
a
think
huge
that-
advantage.
That's
Yeah,
it.
but
For
I think
$130 million.
That's a big
I'm
advantage.
saying-
It'll buy a lot.
Okay, then add squandering no, that's why he's one of the people who has
Right. Right.
I don't for a second think that he doesn't have a shot, but if it doesn't work out and if that money is squandered, then he will have always been better off just saying no and
Well,
keeping that reputation intact.
I hope that he is actually the Republican candidate because he got that $130 million and because he will be the principal recipient of hundreds of millions of more dollars. Because when Bernie Sanders wins, I want him to beat the person who got the most money from the billionaires. That would be nice symbolism as Bernie becomes the president.
Yeah. I think that the real problem for Jeb Bush is that he's going to debase himself. And he's in the middle of debasing himself.
He's in the middle
now.
of doing it as we speak,
Right.
right?
And so, whereas I hope Gore wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to lose, which I think there's no shame in, right? Some people in Washington, no, to be fair, people all across the country, I get it. People think there is shame in losing. I don't think there is.
I don't
think
either.
there's shame in not trying, okay? But in the case of the Republicans, there's also shame in taking stances that are just, ridiculous and barbaric and, and inhumane and all those things. At least as a Democrat, you don't have to do that. I mean, you debase yourself in other ways by being wishy-washy.
Or
and,
maybe
you
too pro-corporate,
Yeah.
but you're not
Yes.
humiliating yourself.
Yeah.
That's right. That's
You
right.
look at these guys as Republican candidates and you say, like Jeb Bush, you know better and you're a dum-dum.
Right.
But even you know better than this.